This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
All right, everybody, welcome into another edition of the Bartholomew Town Podcast. It's Bill Bartholomew here with you. Feels so good to be back. Season 5 well underway. Great to hear from you out there. Appreciate your emails and messages on social media and whatnot. We're back. No need to mention it anymore. We're underway. Here we go. A huge year in Rhode Island politics, no doubt about it. And certainly this season, we'll be covering all of these major races. Obviously, the governor's race, the congressional race that's recently become a factor in all of this. Even, of course, some of the local races, city councils and whatnot. So lots going on in that department. Will be full throttle, full court press in the political arena. And as always, expanding into other stuff as well. We're going to do a lot more with music, local music here in Rhode Island, at least a monthly segment where I'll be interviewing and hopefully hearing some music from a local artist every month. Looking at innovation as we do, looking at the media as we do, looking at all kinds of things that impact Rhode Island, plus expanding out for some more national conversations, and even in some cases, some global conversations, because it's all happening and it's all very real. For today, I'm really excited about this one. This is one of my favorite people in Rhode Island media, Merrill Sampson, who's now the chief photographer at ABC6. And Merrill and I met, I don't know when it was, I feel like it was during the 2020 protests in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and everything that was happening in that really powerful experience. And I was just so drawn to Merrill because of his commitment to getting into the thick of the story and putting his body on the line, if you will, to do so. And then also seeing his product and really understanding his eye, which is the most, you have your heart, your soul, your brain, and all that. And then it all comes down to using your eye as the primary instrument when you're a photographer, whether it's a news photographer, an artistic photographer, whatever. And Merrill has that X factor. It's one of those things. You really either have it or you don't, and he's got it, and he brings a really important and unique perspective to the Rhode Island media. So I'm excited to have him here on the pod. We'll also be discussing his recent switch from WPRI 12 to becoming the chief photographer at ABC6, which is a fascinating station, right? Fascinating stuff. I mean, I don't think anybody here is going to admit or suggest or whatever that ABC6 is in the same viewership or reach as Channel 12 or Channel 10, but they're doing something really cool right now. They're using TikTok. Bringing Merrill on is huge, and I just feel like they're carving out their own identity, and we chat about how that project, as Merrill describes it, is kind of unfolding and playing out in some of the digital spaces and where they're going with that. And also, I always like to get people's take on what Rhode Island needs, and I thought Merrill had a really somewhat on the surface type answer, but then also really deep because of the viewpoint from which he has developed this opinion. So great stuff here today with Merrill Sampson here on Rhode Island's podcast of record, Bartholomew Town. Remember, you can support the show for as little as $3 a month by heading to patreon.com/Bartholomew Town. That's patreon.com/Bartholomew Town. So you've actually, you've carved out a world for yourself within Rhode Island journalism that's really, it's very specific because you and I met out on the street. You were like one of the few reporters or photojournalists in your case, but that there would actually, when there was a protest or there was some kind of event, we would actually be with the people walking inside. The other people are out and they're standing a quarter mile away doing a live shot or whatever. And it's kind of all right, this is happening, but they're not in there. And I was just so psyched that it was kind of you, Steve Alquist, and I, and Steve Klampkin from WPRO, when he was there, we were inside the belly of the beast in the summer of 2020 and then beyond. And just sort of that and that's the magic of photojournalism as well. But just being in the story, is that kind of your goal, is to just not hold back and just put it all out there? Is that accurate?
My goal is to do my job, and sometimes my job means getting in there. And personally, as someone who's into more of the broadcast and video element of my job, the best visual is in the middle of the crowd.
Yeah,
you're going to see the best shot in the middle of the crowd, and that's something I'm willing to do. And over the course of that year, in the last few years, we've seen how these crowds have changed and how we address these situations. So, going forward, I was probably very fresh in my career and thinking, oh, I want to get the best shot. But like looking back at it and going forward, it's just like, it's a safety thing. Like there have been some very bad things I've seen in those crowds that I'm just like, I shouldn't be in the middle of this with a television camera. But
definitely. Yeah. Especially with a camera that has a mainstream station logo on it. That's a dangerous thing to be in any of these protests, left, right, center, whatever. There's an aggression against the media that is, in some cases, like well-founded, but then when you're talking about your reporting, it's like makes no sense at all. I remember there was one protest, I think it was last year, and I think it was a Palestinian rally at RISD, and then you and I were the only people covering it. Like literally, we were the only two. And then they marched through downtown, and we're walking along, and some kid came up, and they're like, you got to turn your camera off. Like you can't be here. And I remember you'd be like, this is the First Amendment. You guys are in public. We're covering a story. We definitely can be here. But then in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, if they come after us, it's 2 against a zillion people, and you've got a however many pound camera that you're carrying around. It gets gnarly.
I mean, you can gauge that sense. I remember that encounter. That person was just the only person who had something to say to any of us. And I was just like, look, I go to these things all the time. The reason nobody cares that I'm here is because I go to these protests all the time. I cover these. Like, I think we give fair and accurate reporting. So, I just have to be there and cover it. So let me do my job. And it's just strange, like, sense because they're using their First Amendment right in that moment. Like you're out there protesting, and I support that 110%. But, I'm a journalist. I have to go there and cover it. That's what I'm told to do. That's what I'm obligated to do. And, I want to get your side of the story too. And I think the biggest problem in that situation was for at least the guys in the local television market, it was like they didn't trust us, so they didn't want to talk to us. And then the story is whatever I documented. And if the story is, something chaotic happens, people get arrested, that's all I heard. But if a protest organizer came up to me and told me, this is why we're here, this is why we're doing it, this is why it's day X that we've come out here and done this, they get more credibility, their experience, their movement gets more credibility, and, they get what they need. And, I'm just trying to help facilitate that in the most fair and biased way possible.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's something that it's an earned trust, but once you've kind of entered into that space with different crowds or different groups of people, you have to unearn that. And the standard is that, what you're doing there is ethical, and you're trying to tell the real story. So it always throws me off. And I get it too. You don't want to necessarily stick the camera in some kid's face, or even frankly, whether they're Trump after the election, the people who were out protesting the election's rigged, Bob Lancia really won the congressional seat or whatever it was. It goes on both sides of the aisle. You don't necessarily need to stuff a camera in someone's face, but at the same time, it is the public. And if someone is revealing themselves to the public, that's the mirror that journalism provides and is required to provide. Otherwise, it's just PR.
This is true. And the other thing I don't understand is you're out there and you're doing that. And obviously you want to draw attention to yourself. You want to draw attention to your cause. If I don't document it, I'm not saying, we're the end all be all, it's local news. But if no one's out there to document it, how are we going to hear about it? Yes, there are the people who are outside who happen to see you walk by, but they just saw a glimpse of it, where I'm trying to go in and, tell a story in an allotted amount of time. But there are other journalists there who cover it, especially a lot of the print journalists who have this time and space to cover a lot of the information that's going on there. And yourself with, all the different media devices. I think in TV, it's very limited, but I think the journalists in this state, I know for a fact, cover these events very well.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's there's no question about it. And it's almost a model for other places in the country where you see a more combative relationship between the press and activists, and working together, either on the record, off the record. There's a coordination and there's a trust element there, but then there's also, you're obliged to tell the real story. So it's fascinating. So you were with 12 News, WPRI, which, was a fascinating, you were in there during they're kind of rebranding and rebirth. And really, they're definitely making an effort to try to take on Channel 10, at least looking to the future, in terms of being the station, the television station of record. There's no doubt about it. But now you're the chief photojournalist at ABC6. And ABC6 is such a fascinating outlet. It's the number 3 station, but you own it in such a way that it gives you a lot of freedom to try new ideas, to experiment on TikTok, to, push boundaries and rethink what a newscast is. And you get buy-in from your audience in a way that's, like, to me anyway, as a viewer, is it's very humanized, and there's more that you can do with that. So I wonder, like, where do you see yourself going as far as you personally, as the chief photojournalist, the station as a whole, because you're in a unique position in this market. There is no other ABC6 in Rhode Island. And you can't, there's an active competition between 10 and 12. There's an active competition between the Projo and the Globe, and they all do different things. But you have a rare opportunity to kind of just do your thing and own your lane and bring viewers in that are looking for that different lane to ride in themselves.
Yeah. The project that's going on at ABC6 with our company, Standard Media, was very enticing, and was interested to go there and have the opportunity to be in a leadership role and take on the responsibility to do that. I think it's true. We are, on the outskirts of the rest of the market in terms of competition, but, we're actively trying to compete with 10 and 12. Like, that is our main goal. And everybody in that room wants to be just as good, if not better than the journalists next door. And we're all friends. Like, that everybody's out. Yeah. We all hang out. We're all cool. But it's an interesting project, because when you come from, Channel 12, which is a very strong television station, and move to Channel 6, who's a television station that's sort of recovering from its glory days, back in the 80s and 90s when they were in the mix with the competition. Like I said, it's an interesting time, but, in that newsroom, I get to express myself a little bit more. I get to see a little different types of stories compared to what the other 2 stations are doing, and how they dish out their news, not dish out their news, but like how they brand it, the brand of news that they push out. And like you said, we do something a little bit differently. I think our reporters look at stories differently. We follow leads differently in terms of what we think is interesting and we can report on. And like you said, we are doing other things like on TikTok and other social media platforms, and our web stuff is really important. We're trying to improve that because, everybody's on their phones now. Most people just get their push alerts, and that's how they get their news. Like, really, people aren't tuning in as much as we think they are. Yeah. But, the TV element is very important. And, I think the best part about ABC6 is, I'm in the youngest, most diverse, and most inclusive newsroom in the market. And I can pretty much say that for a fact. You have me, who is, I would say, the only African-American photojournalist in the state other than Chris Craig from the Projo.
Exactly. Yep.
As far as I know, we have Dominique Turner, who's one of the only African-American females in the market other than Chelsea Jones. And probably others who are still in my mind, Courtney Carter, who just left to go work with Magaziner. I just had one of my editors. She is now a shooter. She's the only female shooter in the market. And she's one of the only Asian photo journalists in the market now, other than Sheena Lowe. So, to be in that area, and those people are young. We're all in our mid-20s, like early to mid-20s. And, there are some strong veterans in the room, like John DeLuca. John DeLuca's been such a great resource. He really pushes the people in that room to be good journalists because he has decades of experience, and, he imparts wisdom all the time. So I think the project is possible. I think, we all want it to happen right now. We'd love to be in the mix and just head to head with every other station in the market and every other outlet in the market. But I think it's going to take some time, but that looking good from this perspective.
Yeah. Well, the 6 o'clock newscast is one of those things that, I watched every night growing up. Channel 10, in my case, I became obsessed with the personalities, writing to Gary Lay and Frank Carpano on Channel 10 and, Gene or whoever, and the whole thing. I was so into that format. And then I haven't had a TV since 2006, and I feel way more connected to the intricacies of news without a TV. I still am able to watch a lot of the 10, 12, and 6 stuff online. So, even if it's not appointment viewing. So I'm just one example, but I imagine branching into the TikTok realm and, do you see an opportunity for ABC6 to get into more long form stuff, to get into more digital first content? Is that something that's a part of this project that you might be able to carve out a niche that is entering in a space that nobody is touching right now? Not, obviously around PBS and WPRI, and even to an extent 10 do long form journalism, but there's so much that you can do long form journalism on here in Rhode Island. Is that something that's like a part of this project, or is that giving away trade secrets?
A lot of that is obviously above my pay grade in C-suite decisions that go on with Standard and what they would like to do for their stations. But I think, that you're right. We need to find a niche. I think we're working on that. And I think in general, our niche is outside of what the two stations do. I think we don't do as much hard news as they do. I think we focus on different stories, and I think that benefits us. So I think that's something we will probably move forward with. And I know these conversations are happening. Like I said, I'm on the outskirts of them. It's above my pay grade. And, as soon as it's ready to happen, we're going to do it. Like, there are many things that have changed over the last 3 or 4 months I've been there. We're just going with it and figuring out as we go. And, I think big things in the future. It takes time to get the pieces. Like I said earlier, it's just, would we like it to happen right now? Would we like to have a full web system, have guys coming in doing full long piece journalism? Yes. But, there are other things that need to be taken care of. I think our priorities need to lie in certain places. There are things that I would like to see improve immediately that I've had discussions about. And, it's open and it's open knowledge, and people can make assumptions onto, the things that need to improve there. And, once those things happen, and that gets resolved and we're in a steady place, and, the world is our oyster. And I think right now, too, in the television market is a lot of movement. A lot of people are moving around. A lot of people are not here anymore. A lot of people went to different stations. Like, I myself just transferred over to another station. I'm not a TV personality, but, I am someone who's known in the market. And, that makes a difference. And when people hear that, they start to see, well, what's going on? Like, is there some turbulence? And I think it's an open playing field right now. We may not be right next to them, but when we have the opportunity to make that push, we could totally be right in the mix with the other two television stations. Yeah.
And I feel like the newscast as a whole is ready for just the thing that it is, and is ready for, right now it's pretty much like, good evening. Here's somebody who misbehaved or disappointed us based on our standards. Here's another person who disappointed us based on our standards. There was a fire here. There was a fire here. There was a car accident here. This is coming up next week. Now here's the weather. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Let's go deeper. Let's find something to make out of this hour that's less like just shock value. And that's like the work that I know you for mostly is going deeper. You're in the thick of the protest. I've seen you. I've been so inspired by you in the march, like with holding the camera above your head and just like, yeah, this is TV, man. This is it. This is where we're going. Bringing people who are not going to show up in Providence for a rally into that rally, or bringing people into a press conference or a gaggle with a politician or whoever candidate. Just going in and taking that lens and literally delivering it to people who would never go to that place. That is where I feel like you're going, and that is so exciting because it's new and obvious. It should be, but it's not really what a newscast is anymore. It's more of a judgment on, again, that standard of misbehavior, and let people decide for themselves. And if you're a photojournalist, you have a unique opportunity to just expand a human being's eye and other receptors and bring them to a place so they can just go, oh yeah.
And like you said, was and is with the newscast. I'm inspired by some of the great journalists in our market. Like I said, John DeLuca, I got to spend time with Mike Montecalvo over at 12. And some of their seasoned reporters like Ted Nesi and Tim White. I mean, I didn't work with them directly, but I got to speak with them, sit in the room and have a conversation. And, the way they talked about it and, the stuff I used to see, it was just like, this is what we should be doing. Why aren't we doing this anymore? Like, one of my favorite photographers who just recently retired, Scott Del Sol, from WPRI, worked there for 40 years. The last year of his career, I was there, working weekends. He was cutting the shows. He was just on his glory lap, and he would just show me all the stuff he shot. And I would watch his stuff. Like, he would shoot, he shot the Rhode Island Air Show. He was in a stunt plane, leaning out of a stunt plane, shooting stunt planes out the side of a plane. Like, it's like, that's what people need to see. Why don't we do that anymore? And so, any chance I can get to deliver it in that sort of way, any chance I can, have to get into the mix of something, get a great visual and give it to the audience. And like you said, have that visual just tell the story itself is a chance I'm going to take. And, I hope a lot of people, I believe a lot of people in the market are willing to do that as well. It's just the way the industry is going and, the public reception of media as a whole. I think people are kind of holding back, why risk it when, I'm just going to get hate or I'm going to get insulted or I might get hurt. Like, it's a tough balance that people are working on and trying to figure out. And for me, and, I hope to inspire others is, I want to get out there and make the best product I possibly can. I want to give you the best visual I possibly can and go out every day and do that because I've been given a wonderful opportunity to be a journalist and a photojournalist.
Yeah. No, I feel exactly the same way about that. For daily coverage of all things happening in Rhode Island and beyond, follow me on Twitter @BillBartholomew and join the Bartholomew Town Podcast Facebook group. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok. Yes, TikTok @BillBartholomew. See you there.
Now back to B-Town.
What's your favorite story you've covered so far, or the one that's kind of hit you the hardest?
I've gotten the opportunity to cover some stories in my area and some stories I've been interested about. Like, the first story I ever pitched at WPRI was about a female wrestler out of the Providence County Wrestling Club. I did that with Ruthie Polinsky, who used to work at WPRI. She's now in Miami, I believe.
Yeah.
And just hard-nosed news. Like, the other day, this is a good one. There was a DUI crash in my town in Warren. And it was a police officer involved crash. I got a phone call at like 2:30 in the morning from one of my buddies who lives in the area. And he's like, we knew the officer from high school and, got out there, only had my cell phone, sprayed it down, was bothering the cops. They didn't tell me anything, but, eventually they released that this was a police officer and they had alcohol in their system. And then, later to find out that person had a firearm in their possession as reported. And I think, like, if I hadn't been out there, because no one was there, it was 3:00 in the morning. If I hadn't been out there and I hadn't known what I'd known, like, would that have ever happened? So, I've covered so much. It's really hard to put a pin on it. But, I just think every day the next story is going to come that it's going to be my favorite. And that's what I'm working towards. It's just every day I'm covering my new favorite story.
Yeah, exactly. Just keeping that excitement and enthusiasm going is like, that's what motivates the process, no doubt about it. Where do you see, I mean, I kind of opined on this at length, perhaps to an annoyingly great extent earlier in the episode, but where do you see news going? I mean, there's so much discussion about migration to phones, which is totally accurate, or even tablets and desktops, but I think phones for sure is the place that's going to be the primary venue. Yet at the same time, I can speak from the radio side where people, say, oh, radio's dead. What are you doing? No one's listening to that. We just put in a state-of-the-art studio that actually is opening today at WPRO. A lot of people are listening to that radio station. There's no question about it. And the same is true for the TVs. So how do you balance that? So you're kind of like not taking away the traditional product, but you're sort of either supplementing it, complementing it, building upon it in the digital space beyond just TikTok, Instagram. Like what do you see? What's the next thing? What's the next big breakthrough?
I'm not a, like I said, a C-suite guy. I'm not high level. I'm just on the ground shooting news. But, at least in my experience, we're going to transition to digital. It's not a question. Web traffic is the most important thing. In every newsroom I've been thus far, we constantly looking at web traffic. We're digital. It's going to happen. Really what it is the original model of broadcast news going to maintain itself with what it puts its people through. Just recently, there was a woman who was out in Charlottesville. I can't recall. It was a reporter. She got hit by a car during a live shot.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yep.
That is terrible. That should never happen. And that is a constant thing we talk about in the industry of, we need people out there protecting each other. It's not safe. It's not safe. It was never safe to do that. And as the public opinion progresses on local news and news as a whole, it continues to be even less safe. And for her to be in that situation, there are a lot of factors. And one of the biggest factors is nobody wants to really do this job because it's not worth it. And I'm not saying it's not worth it to be a journalist, but the things that some of these people are being put through and what they're getting paid and how they're being treated is not worth staying in this industry. And that's why you see this massive migration. And so if this continues to happen, how can news function the way it's always have if no one wants to do the job? And, that transition to digital will help these mega organizations continue to pump out content, but does it help the quality of journalism? And that's kind of what I'm watching and trying to figure out what's going to go on, because, I've seen a lot of people leave the industry within only my short time of being here across the board, whether that's print or digital media or television or radio. They're just, I'm done with this. Why do I want to do this anymore? It's not worth it. And, that affects the type of journalism that gets distributed to our viewers. And that's not good.
So well said. It's so true. It's, look, there are some people who have made a lot of money in this business. There's no question about it, but most people don't. And again, it's not a complaining fest. Sometimes I see people posting on Twitter like, oh, I only make this much. And, in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, well, try being a musician. You know what I mean? Go do that for a couple of years, then come back to me and tell me that journalism doesn't pay well. But it doesn't pay well. And for the most part, it is a passion that drives you to do it more so than this notion of like, all right, awesome. If I do this for 10 years, I'm going to just be able to go live in Costa Rica half the year and, do whatever I want. It's like, no way. That's not what it is. But you need minds that are a blend of the sharpness and the pedigree of physicians, attorneys, C-suite people, blended with the artistic sensibility of great artists. And then this other thing that is just, to me, like the magic element, which is just the ability to humanize things and be an ambassador for the human species, and in some cases other species on the planet. Mm-hmm. And that's a skill set that is a valuable skill set. And you raise another really interesting point. As digital grows, and as especially young people come in and contribute to that growth through their own experimentation and research by being users of social media or their own consumption of news, and then they provide that information to these giant corporations who then turn around and say, oh, great, thanks so much. But we're going to keep paying you the same. It's almost like the scales as the digital era starts to become the primary era, so too should a compensation and a general lifestyle switch that should come along with that digital pivot.
And I think too, you talk about where news is, and there's so much news, and I only look at it at the lens of, these big broadcast news stations that I get to work for. And, there's news on your end where you work for WPRO, you work for PBS, you freelance, you've built your own journalism credibility to report as you may and get paid, compensated for it as you may, and really, determine your own rules in terms of what gets reported. And I think that's a huge sphere that's starting to grow. And, that's how I consume a lot of the media that I personally enjoy, YouTube creators and people on Facebook and Twitter. I mean, like, please don't get your news from Facebook. But there are a lot of people who have opinions and have commentary on what goes on that is credible, that's educated, that's knowledgeable, that you can watch and get an opinion from. And that's going to continue to grow because it is a lucrative opportunity for people. Like, you can go out and report on what you want to report on, and people will just follow you and pay you for it. Don't have to subscribe to anybody for it.
Yeah, that's the model of the future. There's no question about it. I mean, there's going to have to be some institutional element to it, because otherwise you get into like what you're saying, anybody can do it, which is a great thing. And as someone who started out totally independent journalism, totally 100% doing that thing, I encourage more of that. But then there's also there's a standard at which you have to adhere, because if you drift too far from doing journalism into activism, activism's essential. I support activists. I love activists. I think they're critical to our species. But at the same time, that's different than journalism, because as a journalist, you have to be able to take a step back and be like, I hate these people, but I have to report on them fairly. Or I love these people, but I have to report on them fairly. And that's the challenge that the institutions of journalism have figured out. And the freelance sort of YouTube creator podcast world doesn't have that standard. And it's like, well, this is just amplified activism, less of news. And there's people in this state that do that I have great respect for, but I don't look at them as news people. I look at them as, newsletters for activists. And I'm both the right and left. And again, I love them. I consume it, but it's not the same as what you do when you go out there and cover an event. It's different.
And, and you pointed that out. I was going to say there are people on the left and the right who are independent journalists in this market who I would not call journalists. I'm not going to name names. And
yep,
that's my opinion. It really comes down to, you can say that mainstream journalism has figured out how to accurately report it, but there are discrepancies from the local level to the highest level at the national level, for sure, and you can't discredit that. So nobody's perfect. Yeah. So to bring in that notion doesn't even matter. What really comes down to is the viewer. And I think in broadcast journalism, what I've experienced is I don't think we give the viewer enough credit. Like, the viewer knows what's going on. Like, for the most part, there are things that I read and cover where I'm like, how am I going to break this down for someone who's as stupid as me? I'm not saying our viewers are stupid. That was terrible. I'm sorry. How am I going to break this down for, someone like me who I believe would be the common denominator? Because that's who you want to explain it to, someone who may not have any understanding about what's going on, but like they hear it and they get, okay, this is going on in my community and I know about it now. So, that they've mastered, being able to disseminate information at a mass scale to the lowest amount of people. Doing it perfectly and ethically, absolutely not. And the viewer is going to decide whether you're doing that right or not. And that dictates everything. That dictates what happens in our market. Like, part of the viewership, is concerned about the way they view something and does it deem it credible or not. And that goes for all the independent journalists. There are people who have followings because the people that follow them deem them credible. And, they're going to exist. And we already cater to that in mass media. You have MSNBC, you have Fox News, you have OANN, you have Newsmax, you have the Young Turks, you have all these different massive media companies that cater to whatever specific news you want to get and however you want it to be framed to you. So it really comes down to the viewer and, making sure that they know what good journalism is and trying to explain that to them in the best way possible and holding the people who aren't practicing those ethics of journalism accountable. And, I'm not saying deplatform because, that's a touchy subject, but, it's the internet. It'll do it itself if it decides that's the necessary thing to do.
Yeah, I completely agree. All right, last question. This has been a lot of fun. I look forward to doing it again. Hopefully in studio as well. Like I was saying, I'm in the middle of this renovation and I had to rebuild I was like, all right, it's not going to get done in time. There's too many missing pieces. But my last question would be, you've had an interesting look at the state from a lot of different levels. What's missing from Rhode Island right now? What do we need here to get this thing going in a way where there's more buy-in, less complaining, less, more optimism, at least, if not execution?
I think there needs to be an understanding of the way things are. And I think there are a lot of people who are holding out on that. The city of Providence is the gem of Rhode Island. And what happens in Providence affects and reverberates across the state. And Providence has its issues, whether it comes to, its economic issues, its perceived issues with local government, the violence that happens, the indecency that happens over the course of my time covering. And, people forget that if the city is hurting, the rest of the state's going to hurt. So we need to make sure that our city is doing well. And we need to look at that, what goes on there objectively, and look at what's going on and see if there's actually issues being changed and, keeping the people safe and making the city prosper. And I think once people who are not from Providence County, who are from the outskirts of Providence, out northwest, you have people in South County, you have people like me over in the Bay who, may not frequent Providence, but don't understand that. Once they understand that and they care about the issues that are in Providence, like, homelessness, huge issue in Providence right now. Mm-hmm. Something that would, if was resolved, would definitely help the city. Affordable housing, we've been talking about it for the last year. ARPA money, we're talking about for affordable housing. The budget, we just did a bunch of money for affordable housing for 2023. Like these issues that that are talked about that, are very specific to the city of Providence. Like it affects across the state, but, it's magnified because it's Providence. The population is bigger. It's a city. That's just the way it is. And once those things are resolved and people understand that those issues are important, I think Rhode Island can be a better place. And, I don't want to discredit any of the other areas, like, the East Bay and South County, huge for tourism, huge for the tourism industry, the entertainment industry, the northwest of area of Rhode Island, where a lot of the industrial happens, a lot of the lumber stuff, all that stuff. I'm not trying to discredit it, but the majority of the Rhode Islanders go to Providence to do their business, to work, to live, to do all the things they need to do. So when the city's hurting, it's going to affect the rest of the state. And once we resolve the issues in the city, the rest of the state's going to prosper as well.
Yeah, I well said. Super, super well said. Awesome. I think I want to just go out on you saying that Providence thing, and that'll be the last thing we hear.
Can I have one more thing? I just want to say I'm super duper honored to be here right now. Like, you're one of the greatest reporters in the state. There's no question about that. I appreciate that, man. Wow. That means a lot. You are out here doing the work, going to the press events, reporting on your own, reporting for WPRO, NPR, and even on this platform, the people you've interviewed are, again, also amazing journalists, politicians, activists, and to be what I would consider myself good enough to be considered one of those people and to be interesting enough to have a conversation with you is like super huge. So again, I really appreciate it to being here.
That means a lot, honestly. Thanks, man. Appreciate that. It's been a wild ride. You know what I mean? It's been a wild ride for the last couple. Well, I don't know what it's been now, 4 or 5 years, whatever it is that this has been happening. Mm-hmm. And yeah, there needs the more we shake things up in Rhode Island, the better we are. That's mm-hmm. my philosophy. So even with this congressional race, it's like, who is the person that's running that is the least similar to what our perception of a congressperson would be? That's mm-hmm. probably our person. As long as they're qualified, as long as they're competent, as long as they can be responsive to constituents, let's shake it up. Let's try something new. And that's what I see in your work. And there's a handful of people in Rhode Island right now that I'm like, yes, that's it. That's what we need to do. We need to shake it up and not conform to these artificial standards that aren't real. They're less, there are things that are important. Like you say, you talk about like older or seasoned journalists, I've learned so much from them. There's just off the top of my head, Jim Hummel, Steve Clampkin, being next to like a Brian Crandall at the press briefings, or G. Wayne Miller, or, Barbara Durry and Bartley Price at PBS for me, or Bill Haberman at WPRO, or Paul Zangarrett. Like, these people have, whether they know it or not, they've sculpted everything that I think about. But at the same time, so has my friends who I play music with in Newport, who think that the news is a joke, that everyone sucks, that it's corporate, that it's for old people, and that they have no stake in any of the things that are happening. It's like, no. You have a stake in all of this, whether it's politics or social justice or even just like crises of housing, whatever it is. Like, we all have a stake in this. And that's the role of the news, is to remind everybody, this is our project. We're all doing this together. Like, we've decided we're going to have these structures of power, and they play out in economics and in other spaces, but they're totally artificial. Everyone knows the sky is blue and that the world is, well, not everyone knows the world is round, but most people would agree with that. And that's our starting point. Everything else after that is artificial. And the great journalism in this state, when it happens, it's like a great song. It's like watching an amazing, running back, make an incredible play. It's like those things that are just human on overdrive. And so I appreciate your work a lot, man. Really do.
And like you said, we're all just living in it right now. And, all I'm here is to tell you what you missed, because you're living it too, doing your thing, working, living, putting food on the table, keeping a house over your head. I'm just trying to make sure what's happening in your community. And that's what all the local journalists in this market are doing. They just want to make sure what's happening in your community. Have a great time, live your life. Just, this is happening. Be cognizant of it. When the time comes, maybe be vocal about it, but definitely pay attention. And, for anybody who listens to this and doesn't listen to our local journalists, from television to print, start watching, support us. We don't do it for no reason. We do it because we know that it needs to be done, and we want to make sure that the people hear, see, listen, read, however they consume it, and, become a better person and make a better place.
Rhode Island's podcast of record, B-Town.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.